Where we left off last week, just by way of refresher, is the book of Ruth. Boy, it was written during a time, it says, of the judges. So this takes place maybe likely in the earlier days of the judges. They don't have an exact date of when this took place, but just by the names and the genealogies and things of that nature, we suspect that this is kind of earlier in the series of judges. But if you read the book of Judges, it's a tragedy. It's not a joyful book. I shared this last week. As a kid, I loved the book of Judges because I loved these cinematic battles and all these things that take place in that book. But if you really look at it, it's a tragedy. It begins when they're doing well. Everything's going great. Joshua has brought them into the promised land. They remember the things of God, the word of God, the covenant of God. But the longer that Judges goes on, the more they keep forgetting. They don't teach their kids. They just keep walking in the wrong directions, and then it doesn't take long. And the people of God are worshiping idols. They're putting up Ashtoreth poles. They're sacrificing their own children. They're doing the very things that the nation that they went into, that God actually called them to replace. They're actually looking more like them than those people are looking like the Israelites. They're failing left and right. And it says that the reason for this is in those days there was no king in Israel. Everybody did what was right in their own hearts. And when we tend to do what's right in our own hearts, and there's no guiding star, there's no one leading the charge who's telling us, hey, this is the way, walk in it, we tend to walk whatever way we want, and then we justify what we do by saying, it seems right to me. And what we see in the book of Judges is just the complete de-evolution of God's holy people into the people that they were actually sent to replace. But in the middle of that, God provides for us this book. The book of Ruth, not part of the book of Judges, but intentionally kept outside of it as a stark contrast to the chaos that's taking place during the same time. And in the middle of a time when everybody keeps forgetting who God is, and they keep walking into the consequences of leaving God out of your life, Ruth shows up to a man named Boaz, someone who has not forgotten. A man who loves the Lord. Kind of think of Boaz in the same way that we were looking at David when we were studying David. He's a man who's after God's own heart. He's pursuing the Lord. And what we saw here, right, is he's wealthy. He's got a lot of wealth. It says that he is of great wealth, and he's the family of Elimelech. That is Naomi's husband. And we don't know if he's an uncle or a cousin or what. It doesn't say. It just says he's a member of the family and he's close enough. And there's a component of the Jewish law that dictates that if a family member is left alive and the other family member passes away, then it's the responsibility of the next closest kin to take care of and even marry the wife so that the name of the lost person is kept alive and to bless that person. And so here's Boaz. And it's important to note that at first it doesn't seem like Ruth actually knows that this connection is going on. The important component of the book of Ruth, and I'm going to repeat this probably in every message because this is the theme. And this is, if you blink, you miss it. If you don't study this, you're going to miss this. But over and over and over and over again in the book of Ruth, it's going to keep referring to her and keep reminding us that Ruth is a Moabite. She is not an Israelite. She is not a Jewish woman. And in Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 3, it actually says that the Moabites are people that are explicitly stated as being unable to enter the assembly of Israel up to the 10th generation. By the law of God, she should not even be here. Edomites can come in. Even Egyptians can come in. But God specifically says a Moabite cannot enter the assembly for up to 10 generations, for at least 10 generations, actually. We're about 2 to maybe 4 generations in at this point. She's well within the window where she's not even supposed to be here. So again, by way of recap, last week we saw that Elimelech, he grew up in Bethlehem. Bethlehem literally means city of bread. And it is a place where there was a famine taking place. And rather than waiting on the Lord in Bethlehem, Elimelech grabs his wife and his 2 boys and they head to Moab, a place that the law of God says they're not supposed to go. They're supposed to dwell in the promised land. They get to Moab and they marry 2 Moabite women. These are women that the law of God says you're not supposed to marry. But they do it anyway. And eventually, Elimelech, he dies. And so does his 2 sons. And it leaves Naomi destitute and widowed in a society where that is a very bad thing. At this time in history, in this society, especially in a Moabite society, a woman needed a man in terms of protection, sustenance, stature, and to be a widow was a very dangerous thing. And so Naomi was taken to Moab because that's where her husband took her. It wasn't her choice. She had to follow her husband. Her husband dies, her 2 sons die, and she comes home to Bethlehem because she heard that God was up to something. There's bread again in Bethlehem. And she goes home, and Ruth, this daughter-in-law, who loves her like her own mother, says, entreat me not to leave you. Do not turn back. Do not let me turn back from following after you. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people. Your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts you and me. This is a Moabite woman who is loving with the intensity of godly love. And she looks at Naomi, who is going through the most difficult and hard time of her life. Something not of her own choosing, just something she had to endure. And she says, I will not leave you. I will not forsake you. Who does that remind you of, right? We just read those words in the book of Hebrews. This is God's love that is at work in a Moabite woman, not an Israelite woman, a Moabite woman who says, your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. I will not leave you alone. She sees her mother-in-law. She loves her mother-in-law, and she says, I will not be parted. I see the struggle you're going through, and I am going to press in instead of walk away. She's voluntarily walking into poverty here. She is linking herself to potentially a far worse life than she could have if she turned around, went home back to her own family, and got remarried. She is choosing that because love has brought her in, and love overcomes everything. So we come into chapter 2, and they're home now. And what we just said to the kids is still true. Naomi is in a very dark place. She's having a really hard time. Her name literally means pleasant, but this is so important, and we'll come back to this by the end of this sermon here, guys. But it says when she comes back, all the Bethlehemite people, especially the women, are super excited to see her. Nobody's like, I can't believe you went to Moab. I can't believe you left. I can't believe you married, your sons married Moabite women. Oh, by the way, who is this Moabite woman that you're bringing back that doesn't belong here? No, they're just excited to see her. She comes back and they said, is this Naomi? They're thrilled that she's coming home. And then she says, don't call me Naomi, which means pleasant. Instead, call me Mara, which means bitter. And then she says this, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, which isn't true. She went out in famine. I went out full, and the Lord has brought me home again empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has afflicted me? How many of us can relate to this? Right? Times in our life where it looks like we're going through really, really hard things. And we can look back and we can honestly say, I'm not really sure that this is my fault. This feels like God did this. And so Naomi is kind of pointing up at heaven saying, you have testified against me. You have hurt me. You've afflicted me. I'm bitter. This is broken. And yet Ruth does not leave. She presses in. She encourages. She cares for. She keeps pressing. So verse chapter 2, it starts, and they go to Boaz, Boaz's farm, not necessarily realizing, but we realize that he's a man of great wealth, and he's of the family of Elimelech, and his name's Boaz. And then again, so right, verse 2, it always will tell you this, Ruth the Moabitess, it wants you to remember, she is a Moabite, and that's crucial to the story. She says to Naomi, please let me go to the field and glean heads of grain after him, whose sight I may find favor. And she said to her, go, my daughter. She's just going to a field. She's just doing what she does. And then here's Boaz, who is very wealthy, it says. And it says he's coming in verse 4. He's coming from Bethlehem. So he comes from the city, goes to his fields, and he says to the reapers, the Lord be with you. And they answered him, the Lord bless you. And right there we get the first glimmer into the character of Boaz. In a world where this is during the time of the Judges where most people are forgetting who God is, what God has accomplished, what God has done. In that world, here's Boaz who comes out to the workers of his field and says, the Lord bless you. He's involved in the labor of his land. He's not distant. He's not phoning it in. He's coming out and he is blessing people in the name of the Lord. This guy loves God. He remembers God. He remembers the blessing of God. And what's more, his people are influenced by that. They turn around and they say, the Lord bless you. It goes back to what we were talking about in Hebrews, right? If you're going to lead, if you're going to be in charge, if you're going to hopefully be in charge of anything, lead by example because the people are going to follow what you do. They're going to care about what you care about. Just look at how Ruth is caring about what Naomi cares about. Boaz is a guy who loves the Lord and blesses people in God's name, and as a result, his workers are also blessing people in God's name. Boaz is generous, and we're going to see his workers are generous. And then so verse 5, Boaz says to his servant who was in charge of the reapers, "Whose young woman is this?" He notices Ruth. He sees her. And they give a very interesting answer. And he says, so the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered and says, "It's the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab." Keeps nailing home, she is a Moabite. Don't forget that. And she said, "Please let me glean after the reapers among the sheaves." And so she came, and she has continued from morning until now, though she rested a little in the house. So what's going on here, right? In the same way, like we can look at the law of God and we can say, well, it doesn't seem fair. Ruth seems like a good person, but according to the law of God, she's not even supposed to be there. Moabites aren't allowed to enter the assembly of Israelites up to the 10th generation, so she's not even supposed to be there. But yet here's Boaz noticing a Moabite woman working in his field gleaning. What in the world is gleaning? Well, this again points to the fact that Boaz actually does remember the will and the covenant and the law of God. If you looked at Deuteronomy chapter 24, verses 19 through 22, I'm going to read this to you. This is what Boaz is doing. This is faithful Boaz, remembering the work and the will and the command of God, but also receiving the blessing of following that command. Listen to what he says. God has written this in multiple places throughout Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Caring for the poor, the widow, the stranger, and the fatherless is a component of what it means to be children of God. It says this, verse 19, "When you reap your harvest in your field and forget a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back to get it. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands." In other words, be charitable. Don't hold back. Be charitable. The Lord will bless your charity. Verse 20, "When you beat your olive trees, you shall not go over the boughs again. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. When you gather the grapes of your vineyard, you shall not glean it afterwards. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. And you shall remember." This is why we do this. "You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. And therefore I command you to do this thing." Boy, in a society where everybody keeps forgetting, Boaz is being charitable and allowing his field to be gleaned, not just because he's following the command of God, but because he knows that if I follow the command of God, God promises he's going to bless me. This is not prosperity gospel. This is just normal gospel. God has called us to be generous as a people because he is generous as a God. And he does bless our charity. He really does. And this is something where in our society today, man, we are taught from a young age, get every ounce of everything out of anything that you do and don't share it, right? If you're going to make $20, you make sure you collect $20. If you drop $1, you turn around, you pick it back up, you put it back in your pocket. God is actually saying, if you're harvesting your wheat and you missed one, don't go back and get it. Somebody else might need that. Don't forget the widow, the fatherless, the orphan, the stranger. Boaz remembers this. That's what Ruth is doing. Another thing to think about here is, I don't know how many of you guys have heard this story preached or watched a show or a movie or an interpretation of this, but how many times have you read this story in the past and maybe it's gotten a bit of a Western or Disney slant on it and we think the reason why Boaz loves Ruth is because she's obviously a beautiful woman, right? Like he sees her and he's just like, who's that? Right? And you think maybe that's the attraction. He sees her in the field and he's like, look at her. Wow, who's that girl? That's not it. At no point in any part of this book does it even talk about her physical appearance. It doesn't say that she's beautiful. He took notice of her not because she was beautiful, but because her character. And we're going to see this throughout the entire letter. He notices her because she's been there since dawn working in the fields. And he knows her reason for being there. He's not enamored by her beauty. He's overcome by her character. And in a world where we put so much attention on physical beauty, boy, the point here is that Boaz noticed what she was doing, not what she looked like. Who's this young woman? And they say, well, she came and has continued from morning until now, though she took a little rest in the house. Guys, gleaning is not she's following the harvesters and picking the wheat up off the field. We just read it in Deuteronomy. It says if you missed a stalk, leave it. She's harvesting. She's doing the same thing the normal harvesters would do. She's literally going up to the grains, likely without any equipment. She's poor, remember, and she's literally picking the heads of grain off and collecting them, probably in her dress or something. Maybe she has a bag, who knows? But she is literally doing the work of a harvester. She's picking up whatever they missed. This is hard, laborious work, and Boaz sees that and says, wow, this woman's got some work ethic. That's awesome. Think of Proverbs 31, right? Like the way that it declares a woman in Proverbs 31, maybe there's a little bit in there about beauty, but the majority of it is, man, she knows what she's doing. She's making money over here. She's investing over there. She's good with the kid. Like it's not at all about her physical appearance. It is about her character and even her work ethic. And Boaz is noticing that, but it's not just that she's a hard worker that he notices her. Listen to what he does. It says, verse 8, then Boaz said to Ruth, you will listen, my daughter, will you not? Don't go to glean in any other fields, nor go from here, but stay close to my young women. These are his harvesters, the women that he employs to harvest. Stay close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field which they reap and go after them. Have I not commanded the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink from what the young men have drawn. This is also the love of God, drawn toward the love that Ruth has towards Naomi. We're going to see in a moment that he knows her motivation. He knows her character. He knows why she's doing what she's doing. And what is his response when he sees the value of a woman who is genuinely pursuing hard work, not because she's trying to gain something for herself, but because she's trying to give something to her mother-in-law? He goes above and beyond all that the law commanded. The law says, hey, if you miss something, give it. Let them harvest it themselves. He pulls her in and he says, okay, not only can you glean my fields, you see those women out there? They're harvesting the good stuff. I want you to go right behind them. They know where to go. They know where it's thick. They know where it's abundant. Follow them. Also, I'm going to tell every man on my property, do not touch this woman. Protect her at all costs. These are the same men who said, the Lord bless you. He offers protection and abundance, provision, even favoritism to this woman because he noticed her character. He says, if you're thirsty, I'll make sure you have water. And so, verse 10, she fell on her face, which is, of course, the only response that you can have when the love of God is poured out and you're not even sure why. She falls on her face, she bows down to the ground, and she says to him, why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me since I'm a foreigner? She cannot get it out of her mind. I'm a Moabite. I'm not even supposed to be here. You're supposed to resist me. And Boaz says this is the reason. Listen to these words, guys. This is why I'm saying this is not about physical appearance. This is about the character of a woman. This is about the character of Boaz. This is the character of Naomi. This is the character of Ruth. And we're going to find out that Boaz loves her. Why? Because she's called a virtuous woman. She has a reputation of being virtuous. He says this, verse 11, Boaz answered and said to her, it has been fully reported to me, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, and how you left your father and your mother and the land of your birth, and you have come to a people whom you did not know before. The Lord repay your work, and a full reward be given to you by the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge. Think about this. The thing that has impressed him is her love. He knows that she got there at sunrise, not because she was hungry, but because she knew her mother-in-law would be hungry. She started working at sunrise, and she's been working hard in the fields. She took a little bit of a break until Boaz saw her, recognized her, and said, let me set you up. Go over there. That's where it's the greatest. Let me protect you. I'll make sure nobody does anything wrong. Or if you're thirsty, come and drink. Why? Because I know all the things and the heart you have for your mother-in-law. I love you, Ruth, because you loved Naomi. The love of God is exponential. It's a snowball. As it begins to fall, as it begins to travel, as it begins to touch more people, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It doesn't diminish, it grows. Love overcomes all things. And then verse 13, then she said to him, let me find favor in your sight, my Lord, for you have comforted me. She's been working hard all day. Boaz has comforted her, and she says, and has spoken kindly to your maidservant, though I'm not like one of your maidservants. I'm not one of you. I'm a foreigner. I'm a Moabite. Thank you for this incredible charity. Thank you for this incredible blessing. You're showing me more kindness than I deserve. You're going so far above and beyond the law and the command of God. It's abundantly beyond all I could have ever asked for or thought. And there's Ephesians again. Now Boaz, verse 14, said to her at mealtime, come here, eat of the bread. Dip your piece of bread in the vinegar. And so she sat beside the reapers, and he passed parched grain to her, and she ate and was satisfied. And she kept some back. Keep that in your mind. We'll get back to that. She kept some back. And when she rose to glean, Boaz commanded his young men, saying, let her glean even among the sheaves. Don't reproach her. In other words, I don't want her to pick up the leftovers anymore. I want her right in with the rest of the workers. She's not getting the leftovers. She's getting the first fruits now. She's working alongside his workers. He has brought her in, and she has the same status as every one of his working men and women. She is in the thick of it, receiving any and all that he has. He is pouring it out on her. Do you hear the similarities in this? This is what God has done for you and I. This is what God has poured out upon us as Gentile believers. He has welcomed us in. Because again, I'll say it over and over during this series, what the law of God has kept away, the love of God has embraced and brought near. Ruth is going to end up being in the very lineage of Jesus Christ. A few generations later, her descendants will have David. The love of God overcomes everything. Boaz here is saying, put her right in the thick of it. Give her everything she needs. Don't reproach her. Also, let grain from the bundles fall purposefully for her. Leave it so that she may glean, and do not rebuke her. Such preferential treatment. Such love, such provision, such protection. Boaz is loving Ruth the way that Ruth loves Naomi. But there's also something really important that's going on in this passage that I think is worth noting. And it's not, I wish I could say it was my thought. It's actually something that I heard another pastor say when they were preaching this, and I wish I could remember the name right now. It's escaping me. Boy, it's been a Sunday for names for me. I'm sorry. But the idea was this. Remember, Boaz is incredibly wealthy. And in this passage, he's being incredibly generous because he's motivated by this woman's love, perseverance, character. And he's looking at her saying, give her all that she needs, more than she needs. Give her anything and everything. But you know what he's not doing? He's not milling the flour and sending her home with a basket of flour or a bag of flour. She's still working. She's still out in the field. She's still pulling the grain off the heads. She's still collecting it in bags. She's days away from this becoming food. She's got to go home and beat grain, get the shell out, get the actual inside of the grain out so that she can mill that into flour. Then she's got to mix that with some kind of water or yeast or something if she wants to make risen bread. Then she's got to bake it. Like, she's nowhere near having flour. She's just got grain. You would think, okay, well, charity's good, right? So why wouldn't he just, there's somebody who needs some help. Here's a bag of flour. We'll just cut right to the end. We'll give you the full benefit. You won't have to work for it. She's been working all day. She's been working her fingers probably bloody. She's been there since the morning. She took a little break. She gets a great meal in the middle. He probably gives her some of the best bread she's had in a long time. Remember, she's poor. She does not have a home. She's living with Naomi. She's gleaning. That's her only way to get sustenance. She's all alone. And when Boaz invites her in and says, here's some bread, dip it in the vinegar. That's a novelty. That's some good stuff right there. He's saying, enjoy this meal. But she's out there working. And what this pastor had shared is that this tells us a little bit of the heart of God when it comes to generosity. I mean, obviously, God is generous, and he calls us as his children to mirror that same attitude, that we are called to be generous because he is generous. It's an attribute of God, therefore it should be an attribute of God's people. But he also says this, look, if you're wealthy, be generous with your wealth to the needy. If you are needy, work for what you need. And if those two things work together, everybody remains with their dignity. Everybody is able to keep moving in a forward direction. Sometimes we can truly hinder somebody. If Boaz, for example, when he saw Ruth, said, who's that woman in the field? All right, I got 10-pound bag of flour. Let's just give her a 10-pound bag of flour and send her on her way. This story would be entirely different. There'd be no relationship. There'd be no revelation of her character. She wouldn't be growing. He wouldn't be growing. She'd have what she needed, right? But then she'd use up that flour, and what's she going to do after that? If you're wealthy, or if God has blessed you with wealth, man, be generous with your wealth. Help the hurting people. If you are the hurting people, don't be afraid to work to gain it, right? I know that can sound harsh. Sometimes we are told that the best solution is the quick fix. That's almost never true in any form of any part of just the natural world. We were called to work. Even before man fell, we were called to work in the garden. God gave us jobs in the garden. One of the things that Ruth gets to do while she's been working from morning to night, her dignity is fully intact. The honor that she is paying Naomi is being physically manifested. I don't know how many of you guys have ever been in this situation, but sometimes in moments of struggle and difficulty and hardship, when you just feel stressed out, sometimes the best cure is a hard day's work. To finish the day with your hands weary and be like, look what I just built. Look what I just fixed. Look at the thing that I was able to accomplish. The Lord was with me today. And let's keep going. So he's now saying, give her everything. Verse 17, so she gleaned in the field until evening. She'd been there all day. And she beat out what she had gathered and gleaned. And it was about an ephah of barley. That's a lot of barley. She's worked hard that day. She's got a lot to show for it. Then she took it up and went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. And so she brought it out and gave her, listen, what she had held back, what she had kept back after she had been satisfied. So when she sat down to eat that meal with Boaz, when Boaz invited her into the house and said, hey, eat some of my bread. You know what? Dip it in the vinegar. Have something good today. It says Ruth was satisfied. She ate till she was full. She was enjoying it. And then she took a loaf and maybe a bottle of vinegar, I'm guessing, and she kept it for later, not for herself, but for the mother-in-law she loves like a mother. She goes home and she presents this to Naomi, who probably hasn't had a meal like this since she came back to Bethlehem. And listen to what happens to Naomi. Her mother-in-law said to her, where have you gleaned today? And where did you work? She's probably looking at this big bag of barley going like, wow, nice job, Ruth. And she's, blessed be the one who took notice of you. Blessed be the one who took charity upon you. And so she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked, and she said, the man's name whom I worked with today is Boaz. Now watch this. This is incredible. Love overcomes all. Verse 20, then Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, blessed be he of the Lord, who has not forsaken his kindness to the living and the dead. And Naomi said to her, this man is a relation of ours, one of our close relatives. Guys, do you see what just happened there? What were the last words we read from Naomi? They were this: don't call me Naomi, call me Mara. Don't call me pleasant, call me bitter. For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, and the Lord has brought me home again empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has afflicted me? That's the last thing she said. She was in a state of incredible grief. She was in a state where everything in her life was going wrong, and it wasn't her fault. And she's pointing at God, and she's saying, this is your fault. Why are you doing this? I don't understand. But love overcomes everything. And Ruth does not depart from her while she struggles. Ruth presses in. Ruth realizes that my mother-in-law is in a hard place, and she's going to need someone to take care of her and protect her and feed her. And Ruth goes out to glean like a beggar because she loves her mother-in-law. And while she gleans, her love for her mother-in-law is noticed by a man who can make a difference in her life. God orchestrated this. The love of God in Boaz recognized the love of God in Ruth and the need of Naomi to find the love of God once again. But at no point did anybody ever call Naomi Mara. No one ever called her bitter. They didn't want to agree with the lie. They wanted a reminder of the truth. That's not who you are. God's not afraid of our bitterness. And it doesn't prevent God from approaching us, but it might prevent us from approaching God. Sometimes when we're bitter and we can't shake ourselves free, God's going to provide a Ruth. God's going to provide a Boaz. God's going to get you free. The woman who was saying, call me bitter, is now saying, blessed be he of the Lord who has not forsaken his kindness to the living or the dead. She had no hope. And now the revelation of hope is being poured out on her just through a giant bag of flour and a nice loaf of bread with some vinegar. Oh, the kindness of the family of God can accomplish great things if we would but just act into it. And then she realizes what's really going on. Naomi says to her, this man's a relation of ours, one of our close relatives. This is where it kind of gets weird to us in a modern audience, because we're starting to dip into some of that old covenant law and ritual again. The father has died. The husband has died. Elimelech is dead. And it's actually the responsibility of a close relative to take the wife of the fallen. Now, that's technically Naomi. But it's actually the responsibility of the close relative to take on the responsibility of caring for and keeping the name alive of the fallen man. And so when Naomi says, this is a close relative, this isn't some weird thing from a modern standpoint. There is hope. There's a possibility of redemption for our lives. We are in the pits right now. We are widows. We are homeless. We are alone. We are having to glean just to survive. But now there's someone out there who could bring redemption. Does this not remind you of Christ? Does this not remind you of our own journey? The moments when we're like, we are broken, we are hurt, we are hidden, we are down, and we are out, and yet there is a Savior out there who longs to redeem us and has the ability to redeem us. We didn't just happen upon this field. The Lord beckoned us to it. And so, again, it says, Ruth the Moabitess said, well, he also said to me, you shall stay close by my young men until they have finished all my harvest. Watch this. And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it's good, my daughter, that you go out with his young women and that people do not meet you in any other field. And so she stayed close by the young women of Boaz to glean until the end of the barley harvest and the wheat harvest. And she dwelt with her mother-in-law. She showed up for one day of work. She gets there in the morning. She takes a break. Boaz notices her because he's heard about her already. All throughout this book, you're going to see a teaching that tells you how important our testimony is, how important our reputation is, how important it is to remember. Boaz loves her already because he's heard about her. He knows her character. He knows she's a virtuous woman. He knows that even though she's not an Israelite, she is emulating the love of God, and it draws him to her. He gives her so much more than she could ever ask, think, or imagine. And then he invites her, come back tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day. He doesn't give her a bag of flour, although I bet you there were a few bags of flour that were given out during that harvest season. I just suspect that it doesn't say that. But she comes back to work every day. She works as one of his workers, not on the edges, not picking up the leftovers, but right in the thick with his other young women who are actually employed to harvest the grain. Only she's getting to take home everything she harvests. He takes care of this woman for the entire harvest season. She is provided for, protected for, hydrated. She has rest when she needs it, and bread in plenty. This is what love does. This is what redemption does. It takes the person who feels lost and brings them into the house. It takes the person who feels worthless and assigns them incredible value. The love of God was so powerfully felt from Ruth to Naomi that Boaz could not deny it. And the blessing of God was poured out. I'll say it again, the love of God exponential in its growth. As it travels from one to the next, if the person will receive it the way God intends and pass it on the way that God intends, it just keeps growing and growing and growing. We are called to be a generous people, motivated by the love and generosity of God our Father. There might be people in your life right now who are in great need of your generosity. You might be somebody who is in need of great generosity. We need to remember, there can be seasons in our lives where we're in the first part. There's going to be seasons in our lives where we're in the second part. Don't forget that the reason why God set up this setup, right? The reason why he set up gleaning as a whole was, let me bring it back. Let's read it one last time, and we'll close it. Being generous is not just so that we mirror the character of God, although that is massively important. God actually tells us when you reap the harvest of your field, when you collect your paycheck, when you go to work and come home and have benefited yourself and your family, and you forget something, a sheaf in the field, don't go back to get it. It's going to be for the stranger, the fatherless, the widow, that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. Why? You shall remember. You were once a slave. To the Israelites, he'll say in the land of Egypt, but we were once slaves to sin and death. Yet God has set us free and given us a blessing far beyond all we could ask or think. That's why we're generous. We know what it's like to be needy. Look for the needy people in your life. Look for ways to bless them. If you're needy, don't be afraid to step out and say, is there something I can do? Can I help in some kind of way? Don't be afraid to work, but don't be afraid to ask either. That's the hardest part too in America, right? Like we have a tendency of asking for help. We don't like to do it, but my goodness, we have a benevolence fund here for a reason. And we take care of everybody who asks. Let's be a church that emulates the love of God in the way that we express charity, in the way that we take care of the needs of others. Let's be a church who is not afraid to say, I'm in need. I'm in struggle. I could use some help. Let's just be vocal about the needs and the blessings that God has placed in our lives, right? Amen. Let's pray.